In the rolling hills of Arkansas, a violent right-wing extremist group plotted to overthrow the U.S. government. Their beliefs were rooted in hatred, violence, and genocidal ideology. These extremists committed horrific attacks, targeting churches and synagogues, planting bombs in public spaces, and even killing a state trooper. The authorities knew this group had to be stopped before their movement erupted into a full-scale war. Back in 1984, a brutal murder triggered a new and alarming chapter of domestic terrorism in the United States. Determined to shut the group down, the FBI launched an intensive investigation. Former FBI official Jim Carlstrom, once head of the New York division, described how these extremists followed a deeply racist ideology that shook the very foundation of American values. The agency was committed to defending those values. And when the time came, hundreds of FBI agents confronted the group, who were armed and ready for violence. It all began in June 1984 in Sevier County, Arkansas, right along the Oklahoma state border. Winona Bryant, a local high school teacher, was driving southbound on Highway 71 with her children and nephews. They were headed to meet her husband, Lewis Bryant, for lunch. Lewis was a respected officer with the Arkansas Highway Patrol and happened to be working that stretch of highway. As they drove, Winona spotted a police cruiser parked off the side of the road. She immediately recognized the license plate. It was her husband's vehicle. But Lewis was nowhere in sight, and her instincts told her something was terribly wrong. Winona instructed the children to stay in the car while she approached the scene. That's when she found Lewis, covered in blood. "Lewis! Lewis!" she cried out, panic setting in. She struggled to stay composed and radioed for help. "Officer down. Please, someone come. He's unconscious, and I think he's been shot." Her call sparked an emergency alert, and responders across the county rushed to the location. Passers-by pulled over to offer aid as Winona attempted CPR. Although she felt a faint heartbeat, Lewis wasn't breathing. Emergency services arrived shortly after, but tragically, it was already too late. Officer Lewis Bryant, a respected trooper of the Arkansas State Police, had been killed. He left behind his wife and their 2 young children. Soon after the shooting, a frantic call came into the sheriff's department in De Queen, Arkansas. A witness reported seeing a brown and white van speeding away from the area, towing a strange homemade trailer. That same van was later spotted in Broken Bow, Oklahoma. When police attempted to pull it over, the driver refused to stop. Eventually, they forced the van to the roadside. As officers approached, the driver suddenly pulled a rifle and opened fire. In the ensuing shootout, one officer managed to hit the shooter in the shoulder, but the suspect kept firing with a .45 caliber revolver until he was shot multiple times and finally surrendered. The shooter was identified as Richard Wayne Snell from Stephenville, Texas. While hospitalized, detectives questioned him. He admitted to shooting Officer Bryant on Highway 71. Snell told them he was already wanted in Texas and had decided to open fire rather than be arrested. Investigators from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation searched Snell's van. Inside, they found a .22 caliber pistol, a hand grenade, and suspicious wires rigged beneath the steering column that led into the vehicle's ventilation system. Fearing the van might be a bomb, they called in a bomb squad. After careful inspection, they confirmed there was no explosive device, just an elaborate fake. The search continued and more weapons were found. A submachine gun and disturbing literature from a white supremacist group called CSA, short for the Covenant, the Sword, and the Arm of the Lord. Their manifesto advocated for the violent toppling of the U.S. government and called for the extermination of Jews and Black Americans. The ATF, a federal agency tasked with handling weapons-related crimes, took over the case. Agent Bill Buford, who had been investigating the CSA for nearly 2 years, uncovered a chilling detail. Among Snell's possessions was a briefcase filled with maps and handwritten notes. One map showed Buford's own neighborhood, including his street and nearby houses. He was stunned. Later, they found that a federal judge, a U.S. attorney, and even an FBI agent had also been surveilled by the group. It wasn't clear whether these maps were for planning retaliation or just for intimidation. Either way, it was deeply unsettling. Buford dug deeper into the weapons discovered in Snell's van. He immediately noticed something familiar, a homemade suppressor attached to the Mac 10 submachine gun. Just 3 months earlier, Missouri police had arrested 3 men attempting to steal a trailer. They were armed with several modified weapons, including another Mac, 10 with a nearly identical suppressor. An informant claimed that those 3 men were CSA members. If Buford could prove that both suppressors were made by the same individuals and trace them back to the group, it could be the breakthrough they needed to dismantle the CSA once and for all. The suppressor attached to the Mac 10 was cleverly engineered and clearly homemade. Buford immediately recognized the design. It matched one he'd seen just a few months earlier. Back in April, Missouri police had arrested 3 men attempting to steal a flatbed trailer. The men were armed with 3 semi-automatic rifles, a sawed-off shotgun, and a Mac 10 modified with very similar homemade suppressor. According to a confidential informant, all 3 suspects were members of the CSA. If investigators could prove that both suppressors were crafted by the same individuals, it would be the key to linking Snell and the weapons directly to the CSA. That connection could become the turning point in their case. On July 5, 1984, just 5 days after the deadly shooting, Officer Lewis Bryant was laid to rest. His funeral was attended by more than 100 fellow officers, as well as then Governor Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary. The tragedy placed a new spotlight on domestic extremism, and Clinton made it a top priority to investigate radical groups operating within the state. A joint task force, led by Colonel Goodwin, was formed to address the threat head-on. Federal and state investigators began zeroing in on Richard Snell's ties to the CSA. The handgun used to kill Bryant, a .45 caliber commander, had an alarming history. It had been stolen 18 months earlier during a fatal pawnshop robbery in Texarkana, Arkansas. In that incident, the shop owner had been shot 3 times in the back of the head. Initially, ballistics pointed to a small caliber weapon, specifically a .22 Ruger pistol. That same Ruger was found in Snell's van. Records from the ATF showed that the CSA's leader had legally purchased that Ruger 4 years prior. Now, with both weapons traced back to the group, agents had gathered enough evidence to bring federal firearms charges against the CSA's leadership. Determined to deliver the court summons himself, Agent Bill Buford headed to Mountain Home, Arkansas, where the CSA's compound spanned roughly 200 acres of remote land. Surveillance footage confirmed that the property was heavily fortified, with sentries on patrol and bunkers in plain view. Intelligence also indicated that approximately 65 people, including leaders, followers, women, and children, were living inside the compound. Years earlier, the ATF had begun monitoring the CSA. What began as a religious sect had gradually transformed into a militant, paramilitary group. As time went on, it became clear that this was far more than just a fringe Bible study. Informants had revealed that other white supremacist organizations, such as Aryan Nations, the Posse Comitatus, and the Order, regularly visited the CSA compound for weapons training. Though a handful of CSA members had been arrested on weapons charges, the group's leadership consistently evaded legal consequences. Buford was determined to change that and bring the full weight of federal law down on them. At the compound's front gate, Buford encountered a man who introduced himself as Noel. After briefly disappearing behind the fence, Noel returned and said the group's leader was willing to meet, but only if Buford entered alone and unarmed. He would also need to be searched before being allowed inside. Buford agreed. He handed over his weapon to a colleague, even though he knew walking into an armed compound without protection was a major risk. "I wouldn't have let one of my men do it," he later admitted. But in that moment, it felt like the right thing to do. This was a bold move. The CSA was known to be heavily armed and unpredictable, but Buford needed to send a clear message. Federal agents wouldn't be intimidated. Inside the compound, Buford met face-to-face with the group's leader. The property looked, at first glance, like a quiet rural settlement. But behind the facade were reinforced stone buildings and hidden bunkers scattered throughout the grounds. Buford explained that he was delivering a court summons, not an arrest warrant. The charges were tied to weapons believed to be used in the killing of Trooper Bryant. Some of those firearms had been traced directly back to the CSA. The leader asked if he was going to be arrested then and there. Buford reassured him that this was simply a legal summons to appear in court. The leader accepted the paperwork and ordered his men to escort Buford safely off the property. Later, in front of a grand jury, the CSA leader denied ever knowing Richard Wayne Snell, the man who had already confessed to Bryant's murder. He also claimed he had no idea how weapons linked to his organization ended up in Snell's possession. On November 1st, 1984, Richard Snell was officially convicted of murdering State Trooper Bryant. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. That same day, Snell was also charged with a pawnshop murder in Texarkana. By early 1985, pressure on the CSA intensified. The FBI, ATF, and Arkansas prosecutors ramped up efforts to bring down the organization once and for all. FBI Special Agent Jack had been working closely with an informant who claimed that the CSA was actively involved in domestic terrorist activities. According to the informant, the group organized what they referred to as road trips, where members would scout out businesses they could rob, or, more disturbingly, identify Jewish establishments as potential targets. 2 years before the murder of Officer Lewis Bryant, CSA members had allegedly set fire to a Jewish community center in Bloomington, Indiana. Around the same time, they were also believed to have carried out an arson attack on a church in Springfield, Missouri. The reason? That congregation had begun welcoming LGBTQ members. But it didn't stop there. Just 3 months later, the group reportedly attempted to blow up a major natural gas pipeline in Fulton, Arkansas, with the aim of disrupting energy supplies across the Midwest. Fortunately, the plot failed, and the pipeline remained intact. Assistant U.S. Attorney Steve Snyder began to see a deeply troubling pattern. What initially looked like random violence soon revealed itself to be something far more calculated. After reviewing the informant's intel, it became clear that the CSA was executing a broader strategy designed to destabilize the country and endanger American lives. This once obscure religious sect had now morphed into a full-blown right-wing terrorist organization, one that had effectively declared war on the United States. Then, in March 1985, a former CSA member came forward with critical information. As a defector, he knew the group's inner workings intimately. He described in detail the weapons and explosives being produced at the compound. According to him, there was a workshop on-site where the group manufactured grenades and suppressors, and where they modified semi-automatic firearms for greater lethality. He also claimed the CSA was in possession of an M72 Law anti-tank rocket launcher. Even more concerning, they were allegedly constructing their own armored vehicle and had planted landmines around the perimeter of the compound. The informant provided a lengthy list of the group's alleged crimes: vehicle theft, mail fraud, and stealing government property, among others. Based on his testimony, federal prosecutors obtained a search warrant to raid the CSA's headquarters and seize any illegal weapons or explosives. To hit the group where it hurt, U.S. Attorney Snyder wanted to use the RICO Act, a powerful federal law typically used to take down organized crime syndicates. Under RICO, the group's leaders could face up to 20 years in prison. While many of their crimes on their own carried lighter sentences, RICO treated the coordinated criminal activity as a much more serious offense. With that decision made, attention turned to how the warrant should be executed. Agent Buford knew this couldn't be a simple knock and enter. We were dealing with a militant group, he recalled. Storming in and shouting, "With the feds, let us in," would have triggered a firefight. To minimize the risk of bloodshed, the FBI deployed its Elite Hostage Rescue Team, or HRT, formed in 1982 as a counterterrorism unit. The HRT was trained to respond to both domestic and international threats. By 1985, Special Agent Danny Coulson was in command. Though the HRT was built for high-stakes missions, neutralizing terrorists, rescuing hostages, this case was different. There were innocent families inside the CSA compound, including children. The team was under strict orders: avoid gunfire at all costs. Coulson set up a command post in nearby Branson, Missouri. The HRT was divided into 2 specialized units: snipers and operators. The snipers were tasked with gathering intel and providing cover, while the operators would handle direct action if needed. Since Agent Buford had already been on the CSA compound, he provided valuable insight. I had spent so much time around property, watching, studying. I knew exactly where the bunkers were, what buildings to look out for, and how best to approach. The mission's first phase would be reconnaissance. Before engaging with a heavily armed group, the team needed to understand the layout of the land, the infrastructure, the people, and their weapon placements, all without alerting the CSA. That evening, Colson and his team move in for a surprise surveillance operation. The CSA had already been identified as a domestic terror threat, and federal agents were now preparing to infiltrate what was essentially a heavily guarded fortress. Colson briefed his recon team thoroughly. Their job was to quietly gather details about the terrain, buildings, patrol patterns, and any signs of military-grade equipment. They had to do this without being detected by the CSA's sentries. Buford joined the mission as a guide. He'd been monitoring the group for years and knew the compound like the back of his hand. I had mapped out a full plan for how we could carry this out safely. I knew where the defensive positions were and how to avoid them. Agent Colson, fully aware that the CSA was armed to the teeth, wasn't taking any chances. The CSA was no small threat. They were heavily armed with assault rifles, equipped with night vision gear, and had a solid communication system in place. These people were well-trained and knew exactly how to use their weapons. But despite the risks, Commander Danny Colson had complete confidence in his team. The hostage rescue team had some of the best reconnaissance operatives in the business. Their next move required absolute stealth. The team needed to move low and slow, belly crawling across the ground, listening closely, watching every inch of their surroundings. One agent moved in first with a thermal imaging camera, scanning the area for signs of life, alert to every sound. That's how they avoided being spotted and ensured they weren't walking into a trap. Sure enough, they encountered armed CSA patrols, carrying assault rifles and moving to the compound. Once the path was clear, the rest of the team followed. A rear guard was positioned to make sure they weren't caught off guard from behind. Colson's biggest worry was the CSA's anti-tank weapon, the M72 Law. That kind of rocket launcher didn't require expert marksmanship to do serious damage. It could tear through vehicles or bunkers and easily kill agents in the line of fire. The recon team crept closer to the main area of the compound, where most of the CSA members and their families were asleep in various buildings. As commander of the tactical team, Colson had to know exactly what was where, what buildings could be barricaded, which ones might need to be breached in a worst-case scenario. One of the terrifying possibilities they had to plan for was a mass suicide, or even parents turning on their children in a moment of desperation. That had happened before with similar extremist groups. The mission had to prioritize saving lives above all else. Now, with a detailed understanding of the compound's layout, Colson knew the next steps. A full-force raid was possible, but would come at a high cost on both sides. The compound stretched across 200 acres. After realizing the scope, it was clear that the existing team wasn't enough. 50 agents couldn't secure that much ground. Colson requested backup, an additional 200 agents from FBI field offices across the country. They needed to arrive without alerting the CSA. Fortunately, the nearby town of Mountain Home was a popular fishing spot, so the agents disguised themselves as fishermen. They booked motel rooms near the local rivers and lakes, planning to use fishing boats to reach the compound through its least protected access point, the lake. As the agents prepared to launch the operation, Colson brought in Special Agent Clint Van Zant, a veteran FBI negotiator trained in handling hostage situations. In high-risk scenarios like this, there are usually 5 tactical options: contain the threat, isolate the group, open negotiations, escalate using force like tear gas or snipers, or launch a full assault. The last 3 almost always lead to casualties. The team chose option 1, contain, isolate, and negotiate. Danny Colson was placed in charge of all 3 phases, but he wasn't entirely comfortable. I was a sniper, a team leader. I knew how to take people down, not talk them down, he admitted. Still, Clint believed Colson was the right man for the job. He had presence, command, and experience in the field. I'd been part of many operations with negotiators, Colson recalled, so I knew the drill. Clint briefed me on some strategies and techniques that gave me just enough confidence to lead the talks. After 10 intense days of planning and preparation, everything was in place. Over 200 federal agents stood ready to surround one of the most dangerous armed militias in the country. In 1985, the FBI had its sights firmly set on the CSA, a paramilitary group suspected of domestic terrorism and multiple murders. The operation kicked off with sniper teams and agents approaching the compound from the lake, slipping in through the weakest entry point. Their job was to secure the perimeter from the rear. Additional teams moved into the surrounding woods to guard the flanks of the compound. The ATF, working alongside the Arkansas State Police and the Missouri Highway Patrol, set up roadblocks to keep CSA supporters from entering or leaving the area. Meanwhile, the FBI deployed a special surveillance aircraft known as the Night Stalker. Its onboard thermal imaging system tracked movement across the compound with pinpoint accuracy. Agent Danny Colson remembered watching the real-time footage from the skies. We could see everything. CSA members moving around in small groups, talking among themselves. We could even spot animals, deer, coyotes, rabbits. That gave us a serious tactical edge. Using aerial thermal images from the Night Stalker surveillance aircraft, Agent Colson was able to monitor CSA patrols and carefully maneuver his team around them. He ran the entire operation from a command vehicle parked near the main gate of the compound. According to one of the FBI's hostage rescue experts, entering at night and waiting until morning to make their presence known was a deliberate move. The team could have launched a full assault, but chose not to. Their mission was to resolve things peacefully. Snipers were already positioned across the property and near the gate. Within 10 minutes of setup, they spotted two armed men leaving the compound and heading toward their location. Colson received a report. Two targets approaching, one with an assault rifle, the other with a sidearm. He instructed his team to make their presence known. Shout out, tell them we're the FBI and they need to go back. Make it clear we could have arrested them, but chose not to. We're here in peace. The agents did just that, issuing command for the men to return to the compound. FBI, stay on the property. Move back. Now. Inside the compound, lights started flickering on and activity stirred. Something was definitely happening. Moments later, a third man emerged from the property. Colson told his team to let him get closer and then take him into custody. FBI, stop right there. Don't move, the agents ordered. But Colson wasn't interested in escalating the situation. He was ready to open negotiations. It was time to talk. Finding someone willing to speak on behalf of the CSA wasn't easy, but finally, the man identified himself as Kerry Noble, the group's second in command. Colson explained, "We're not here to hurt anyone. We're here to talk. But if your people start a war, we'll be forced to end it." Noble agreed to pass that message along to the CSA's leader. By sunrise, the FBI and state police had fully surrounded the compound. News of the standoff began leaking to the media, and reporters quickly gathered along the nearby roads. Federal agents established a direct communication line into the compound. Not long after, Colson got a message. He's ready to talk. It was the leader himself. Colson repeated the same message he gave Noble. "We have a federal arrest warrant for you." The leader agreed to come out for negotiations, but on one condition: he wouldn't be arrested during the meeting. If they tried, his men would resist. Colson agreed to the terms. "Okay, you've got 5 minutes." Before the meeting, negotiator Clint Van Zandt prepared Colson for the interaction. He explained that the CSA leader would only respond to someone he viewed as his equal, someone with military authority and presence. To make that impression, Colson wore a tactical uniform with only a 9mm sidearm, which was standard among military commanders. The visual mattered. It made the CSA leader more willing to engage. As Colson approached the gate, he knew how important it was to project control without provoking aggression. "You have to look like the one in charge," he said later. "But at the same time, you need to get them talking, not just issue demands." Tension was thick. The CSA leader and his armed guards were now fully visible. FBI snipers had them in their sights. It was a standoff between two armed forces, each capable of devastating firepower. And the CSA believed the feds were evil, calling them agents of the devil. Colson needed to build trust. He calmly told the CSA leader that the FBI was there to confiscate grenades, assault weapons, the M72 rocket launcher, and any other illegal firearms stored inside the compound. He spoke in a low, steady tone. "We've been here before. We know what's going on." The leader listened, but wasn't ready to give up. He made no commitments, no concessions. But he didn't walk away either. Coulson had promised not to arrest him during the meeting, so he kept his word. The leader returned to the compound to talk it over with his people. That moment was critical. It began to lay the foundation for trust. For now, Coulson and Van Zandt had no choice but to honor the agreement. The first day and night passed without violence, but also without resolution. On the second day, the CSA leader asked for another meeting. This time, he appeared in full military gear, wearing a camouflage uniform. The change in dress suggested a shift in tone. He now recognized Coulson as a true counterpart. During the meeting, the leader admitted some of his men were getting restless. They were talking about breaking out, using force to push through the FBI blockade. Coulson's patience was wearing thin. "Who exactly are you planning to fight?" he asked. "You haven't seen us. You don't even know where we are. If you open fire, you won't be fighting people. You'll be firing at ghosts. No one has seen us. You don't even know where we are," Coulson calmly told the CSA leader. "If you start shooting, we'll be forced to respond with deadly force. But who would you even be shooting at?" He let the words sink in. "You'd be fighting ghosts, and in the end, you wouldn't even know who took you down." Coulson urged the leader to reconsider. "Go back inside. Talk to your people. Convince them to surrender." The leader replied that he was willing to surrender, but he couldn't speak for everyone in the compound. There was one man, he said, who had enough influence to convince the others. A spiritual leader named Robert Mill. Mill was well known in extremist circles, a prominent figure in the far-right underground. The demand to bring him in was unconventional, but negotiator Clint Van Zandt saw it as a possible breakthrough. "We knew this could go one of two ways, bullets or trust," Van said. And trust was the only option that didn't end in tragedy. For Coulson, this was a moment of truth. One wrong move, one shot fired, and everything would spiral out of control. In the mountains of Arkansas, over 200 FBI agents had surrounded a heavily fortified compound. Inside were members of a radical militia, the CSA. And now, their leader was asking to bring in an ally to help convince the group to give up. Coulson agreed, even though it violated standard FBI protocol. Allowing someone sympathetic to the group into an active crisis was a major risk, but the potential for peace outweighed the danger. The FBI flew Robert Mill in from Oklahoma. Van Zandt met with him, hoping to appeal to his better nature. "You could be the one to bring this to a peaceful end," he said. "You'd be remembered as the peacemaker in your movement. I'm not trying to change your beliefs, but your decision here could save lives." Mill hesitated, thinking it over, and then it clicked. Van knew they had him. Mill agreed to help. He was escorted to a secure field phone and called into the compound. He said he was willing to talk to the group, but wasn't yet sure if he could convince them. Coulson gave him an hour. It was a tense moment. They couldn't control Mill, and they couldn't force him to leave. They had to be patient. Too much pressure would make them look weak, or worse, desperate. So they held their ground and waited. Mill called back. He believed he could change their minds, but needed more time. The FBI reluctantly accepted that he would spend the night inside the compound. Finally, on the morning of April 22nd, for days into the standoff, Mill and the CSA leadership emerged from the compound. For the first time, they came out unarmed. The group announced they had decided to surrender peacefully. Coulson greeted them calmly, but firmly. "I'm glad you made the right choice," he said. "But don't mistake this as a chance to run. You won't make it." He gave the leader 15 minutes to gather everyone inside. Shortly after, snipers confirmed that people were indeed leaving the compound. They were in civilian clothes, no camouflage, no weapons, no tactical gear. The siege was over. Not a single shot had been fired. It was a peaceful resolution everyone had hoped for. Over the next several days, ATF and FBI agents searched the property under the supervision of Kerry Noble, the group's second in command. What they found was alarming. Hundreds of automatic weapons, homemade hand grenades, landmines, detonators, and plastic explosives. Near the leader's residence, they discovered an M72 anti-tank rocket. There were also steel drums containing over 100 liters of cyanide. Investigators believe the CSA had planned to use it to poison a local water supply. They also found a heavily armored vehicle fitted with a fully automatic machine gun. In the aftermath, the CSA leader was convicted under the Federal RICO Act and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Kerry Noble, his right-hand man, received 5 years for firearms violations. After his release, Noble changed course and began giving public talks warning about the dangers of violent cults and hate-based ideologies. Richard Wayne Snell, already serving a life sentence for the murder of State Trooper Lewis Bryant, was later convicted for a separate murder, the killing of a pawn shop owner. He was sentenced to death. On April 19, 1995, at exactly 9:16 p.m., Snell was executed by lethal injection. Years later, the CSA compound lies in ruins. All that remains are a few crumbling stone buildings and abandoned shacks, a quiet reminder of a dark chapter in America's battle against domestic extremism.